All right, what's going on, everybody? This is episode number 4.
Number 4.
Number 4 of the Blood Feud podcast. This is Neil.
This is Sam.
I'm really excited about this one.
I am similarly excited.
Today we're talking about a movie that's, I would say, almost in stark contrast to what we talked about last week, which was a Serbian film. We're talking about something a little bit more, I guess, less over the top. It's called We Are Still Here.
Or, as we've been abbreviating it in text, WASH.
WASH. I mean, it works. If something works,
it
works.
Work. This film is a more straightforward homage to the classic like haunted house piece. Although what I want to say is that it's really not actually as straightforward as it might seem.
Right. I don't want to talk about that too much because this is definitely a movie that I feel like the less you know about it going in, the better it is. Like I watched the trailer today after I watched the film.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like disappointed in the trailer because I felt like it gave too much away. I felt like the trailer itself wasn't very good.
Okay.
But I guess, I mean, we can talk about that later. So.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't watch the trailer before I...
Yeah, because I mean, this is a movie that I had heard of, that you had seen.
Right.
And you recommended, you said, yeah, it's good. And this was on my radar, and I was like, okay, I'm going to definitely check it out now. Mm-hmm. So, We Are Still Here. It's directed by a guy named Ted Geohagen, who has never directed anything before. He's got a lot of stuff on his resume, if you will. A lot of producer credits.
Such as,
writing credits.
Okay.
But nothing big. The biggest thing is he was a producer on the second ABCs of Death,
which is what we talked about last week.
We'll
talk about this later, but we talk about movies having speaking with a certain code in a certain language that tells us maybe how to interpret it and how to predict what's going to happen. And I think this film does a wonderful job of utilizing that kind of code, and we'll bring that back. But let's talk a little bit more about this film. So it came out earlier this year, I think in May, June,
early summer.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. What else do people need to know about the film before going into it?
Like you said, it's a ghost story. If you're into stuff like that, it was very reminiscent to me, not in terms of like the plot line, but just the way that it's filmed and the way that the atmosphere of it, of something. And I know you're not a fan of this movie, but You're Next.
No, literally, I was thinking that, and not in a bad way though. And
like You're Next is very not straightforward, but it's not paranormal at all. It's people against people,
right?
But that's not so much what's going on here. So that's why I say not so much in terms of the plot line, but just in the feel of the movie. Also, something like Insidious. I kind of got an Insidious feel. So if you're a fan of those types of movies, I would definitely say WASH is for you.
Washed Out. Yeah, that's really cool that you bring up You're Next, because one of the things that I was literally thinking of that movie. And that's really not my favorite movie, but the reason I love this movie so much is it feels like I'm watching or taking part in a graphic novel. And that's how I felt to some extent with You're Next. It's a little bit over the top, a little bit.
Just a little.
Kind of surreal. And the way that it's filmed, it feels very... It's
smart.
Yeah.
Everything seems like... Whereas with something like a Serbian film, it's chaotic, and it's chaotic on purpose. This is very meticulous. And, like you said, a graphic novel, every panel is illustrated.
And there's even the way the movie opens, and there won't be any spoilers, with these slow, stagnant shots of the landscape and the house. And these things come back. It reminds me, one, of Stanley Kubrick and the way that he does these very slow shots. It reminds me of the beginning of Alien, the way these very slow, patient shots introduce the film. They're like panels in a graphic novel. It really reminded me of that.
Yeah, no, I feel that.
And it also, the film is really reminiscent of like an 80s, 70s.
Oh, yeah. That's something I wanted to talk about a little bit.
Okay.
And this is still without spoilers, I guess. But it's got this very ambiguous time period.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure, when it was supposed to take place. And there is a little hint at one point that's a spoiler, so we'll talk about it later, that kind of gives you a hint as to when it takes place. But it's kind of the 70s, 80s but it could also just be like an old school, you know what I mean? Like
the town in general could just be right, and
so it's not something. I mean, like that's not like a huge, selling point of the movie. It's just something that's interesting. It's kind of like this lost in time, floats around from time period to time period, kind of.
Yeah, and it's a little bit less. What that's similar to is a film like It Follows, but a little bit less because It Follows has like a completely ambiguous time period where there's like weird like shell phones, but also
it goes out of its way to make you feel that it's ambiguous. Whereas this is just,
it feels
just
like
is.
Yeah, it feels like it inhabits an older time.
Yeah.
So who's in this movie? We've got a couple bigger, like not big name actors.
That's another kind of interesting point of this movie is that your typical horror film, something like It Follows or Green Inferno that we talked about, it features college-aged, high school-aged students, and that goes all the way back to the beginning of horror, modern horror with stuff like Friday the 13th and, Nightmare on Elm Street, where it's these college kids, and that's probably meant to relate to the audience, whereas this movie, the main cast is all 50-year-old, 60-year-old people.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. The one person I recognized from it was her name's Barbara Crampton, and she played the mom in You're Next.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's also a guy named Larry Fessenden, who he's kind of like a character actor. He plays a lot of like small roles in several different horror movies. He's like the type of guy where like you recognize his face, but you don't know what from, kind of, at least for me.
That was exactly how it was for me. I knew I recognized him, but I was like, who is this guy?
And then the main character is played by a guy, well, I wouldn't say main, but one of the other main characters.
This is Paul, the husband in the, okay.
His name is Paul. Andrew Sensing.
And
he's another guy that looks familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd seen him from.
Yeah.
So
interesting. And then we've got, of course, the
neighbor. He's their neighbor,
who is the most, I would say, probably the most famous. Although I can't quite place where he's from. He's an older dude. Monty Markham, is that his name?
Yeah, it says he was in Baywatch.
Yeah.
So
okay, we'll talk about him more, but I liked his character a lot. Here's the thing about this movie. Here's part of the reason I love it so much. I love all the characters in this movie. I think
they're all unique and interesting.
And none of them, especially Paul, who is the wife of is it Anne? Oh, the wife. Paul is the wife. It's a cross-dressing movie. No, he's the husband of it's Anne, right?
Yes.
Who is Barbara Crampton from You're Next. Paul's dialogue, I think, is especially smart. I think his character has a few holes that I'll discuss, but none of it feels, nothing feels really poorly written. It never overextends. The dialogue's pretty minimalistic.
It's natural, too, I felt like.
Very natural.
Like, there's a couple parts when, like, this supernatural stuff is going on, and he's just like, what is happening? Like, it's kind of almost comical. But I thought that was good. There
is a very slight comedic attitude in this film that helps it, I think, because it's not at all a thing you would ever laugh at, but it helps you. The movie's not taking itself super seriously.
No,
and that helps it.
At least towards the end, it's not.
Right. Well, in aesthetic, this movie takes itself completely seriously, but in its characters, it's more laid back, but in a way that makes them more believable.
Yeah,
and I
totally
love that.
So I guess before we get into
the
spoilers, just so your quick thoughts on it. I know we've kind of already said, but
well, to give a very brief intro to what this movie's about. Paul and Anne are an older couple who have just lost their son in a car accident.
Yep.
And so they are moving to a town called Aylesbury to a home that was for sale for relatively cheap, a big home, old-style home.
A fixer-upper, if you will.
They're trying to escape. Anne is especially depressed about her son's death. And Paul is like, you know what? We can't do that. They were living in New York. It was claustrophobic and cramped. And she's like, we're moving. We're leaving. We can't do this. We got to get away. And so that's where this film kind of starts off. And to not spoil anything, but just to briefly describe what I love about the intro sequence is that this movie kicks off with this unnerving alien atmosphere right away. The soundtrack is there as the car is driving in. It's these grinding synths that are kind of weird, very 80s. And you see Paul with his big old man glasses. I don't know what those are called. The car is old. All the cars are old, and it feels like a movie from the 70s or 80s. And it's great, but I am instantly unnerved, and you get all these slow shots of the landscape, the house.
And it's winter.
It's winter.
I feel like, I mean, thinking about it, I can't think of a whole lot of horror films that are set in winter unless the point is that it's, a winter environment where they're trying to survive or the Yeti shows up.
It's a little bit reminiscent of The Shining. I don't want to hearken it to that film, though, because it's nothing like The Shining, and that's a good thing. Although I love The Shining, but I think it's a good thing because it stands on its own. Anyway, and even the sequence up until the "We Are Still Here" rolls.
Yeah, it does.
Opening sequence,
which is a very 80s thing where it just pops up and it's a title card that says "We Are Still Here," which you don't really see that. A lot of movies don't even have opening credits or titles.
And this one didn't. The credits came at the end.
No opening credits, but it did have the title card.
Yeah. So you get a bunch of these picture frame shots of every room in the house, the outside of the house, and them kind of just setting the house up, moving in. But meanwhile, you have these really unnerving soundscapes playing, and it just, we talk about good horror writing, whether in film or in literature. You always, as a writer, have to harbor what they call the latent. And all that means is that you make your environment, wherever it may be, seem like there's always something lurking. You don't know what it is, but you're always on edge.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not a writing student, but it has that feel to it.
From the beginning, and I love that. So, but regardless, to sum up what I think about this movie, this is a great modern, but also, it's a great modern twist on the classic idea of a quote-unquote haunted house, which I love. Like I said, it's not going to end up being as straightforward as it may even appear, but it doesn't try to do more than what it sets out to do. It does so in a way that pays pretty lovable homage to the genre, and I think it brings back the concept of a haunted house in a pretty classic way, in a really respectable way.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I loved it. It's probably going to end up easily in one of my top horror movies of the year.
Yeah.
May break its way into just one of my top films in general.
No doubt.
It's like I said, if you're at all intrigued by this movie, go watch it. This is a movie that I feel like really lends itself to discussion as well.
Yeah.
So as we talk about it, feel free to comment on Facebook or shoot us a tweet and say what you thought, because we'll talk about it later, but it's open. There's, like I said, there's a lot of room for discussion. Yep. So I guess now, unless you got anything else, let's kick into spoilers.
Nope. We encourage you to watch the movie. It's great. We're going to talk about it now. If you'd like to stay with us regardless, we'd love to have you. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Okay, so what's the first thing? Anything that you wanted to talk about?
We already discussed the opening scene, and just that the last thing about it is when she puts the picture of their son is named Bobby, the picture of Bobby on the thing on the mantle or on the desk in the hall, and then you just kind of see them watching TV, and the camera just pans over to the hall as this music the wind is blowing. I don't even think there's any music anymore. And then the picture just slams down of its own accord, and you get "We Are Still Here" in it's like a dark red, but kind of bright still font, black screen,
That's one of the things that this movie does, is that it starts to imply that the ghost, the entity in the house, is Bobby, because the mom, Anne, does say that Bobby always hated this picture.
Right, and that's one of the things that I think the movie does super well, is you never... That's up for debate, I think, whether Bobby is ever there or
I think
not.
That's something we should talk about at the end.
You're going to get my interpretation.
It comes back. Yeah. No, I have an opinion on it.
Yeah. So, but then after that, this movie doesn't waste any time boring you. And not that build-up would be boring, but this movie builds in a very energetic way.
Yes, because it's not that it doesn't build, because it does a great job of building, I feel. But it does so while it's moving forward. It's never in one spot for too long.
Right. And the scene exactly after the what would you call that? The title screen rolls. Is Anne is unpacking a box of Bobby's things. There's a baseball in there. I think there's a mitt. There's like a trophy.
Yeah.
And she immediately is hearing noises. And I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for basements because this movie is all about the basement, and it's a very classic trope, the portal to some hell in the basement.
Right.
And I love that. And
even going back to Amityville Horror.
Yes, I mean that's exactly what this movie. If you love Amityville Horror, watch this movie. It's seriously, it harkens to that, but in a different way. So she's immediately hearing noises in the vents, through the floor. Love it. Awesome. It's creepy. It's just classic. It's, it's not like super unexpected. But anyway, so she goes to investigate, and you see the basement for the first time. I love the basement. Let's just talk about how the basement is laid out. It's this really
stone wall,
orange lighting. It's really hot down in the basement.
Right. That's a main point. Is that
it also smells like smoke, which later Paul is going to call. Well, very soon Paul is going to call a boiler man,
right? Whatever they are. Yeah.
It smells smoky. We got to cool it down in here. And then there's the main area of the basement, very rustic, dirt floor, stone walls, and then there's a back room where there's a door to the back room, but there's this circular hole that has been, it's just worn into the wall.
Between almost like up by the ceiling, kind of.
Yeah.
It's not, on the ground.
Like the bricks have fallen
elevated.
Away.
Yeah.
And there's this hole.
And you can't see.
It's just a black hole in the wall that leads back to the dark area of the basement.
Do they mention that that's where the heat's coming from?
No.
Okay.
No. But it's the imagery is so cool, and later it's used to really cool effect in the final sequence. But it's clearly supposed to be some kind of doorway, but it's not really. There's a doorway too, so like it's weird that there's this hole. They definitely found this basement, and it was like there,
right?
And they decided to use it, which I think it is. And there's holes in the wall around it that don't go all the way through, but they look like screaming faces, and it's all just.
I didn't notice that.
It's literally all like happenstance, but I think it's used to good effect. So she goes down here to investigate the noises, and Bobby's baseball glove is down there.
Doesn't the baseball fall off the table?
The baseball falls somehow down the stairs,
and then down the stairs.
She goes back in the dark room of the basement, and finds Bobby's mitt down there.
Yeah. No
explanation, And then, did you notice the shadow figures in this scene? Because there's one behind her.
That was one of them. Almost a complaint and a like that I had with this movie is it's very subtle.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's too subtle.
Okay.
Where I had to rewind it, and I was like, did I really just see that? And like,
yeah. Because I almost missed it because the lighting was so dark, and like when she picks up the mitt and is walking back toward the room, I'm trying to show you right now. It's a very subtle shadow figure behind her, and I love the use of the shadow figures in this movie.
That's another thing I think we need to talk about now that we're right there. Now that we're in the spoilers, the creature design.
Yeah,
and we can talk about that when it becomes more relevant, or we can talk about it now.
Let's talk about the creature design now. Let's start with the shadow figures, and I'm going to show you. What we're doing is we're watching this scene right now. It's so easy to miss the first time. Well, the first time you see one, it kind of runs by. Anyway, this shadow figure topic, I just love the trope. I know it's another trope. Right there, you see?
Oh, yep.
Barely see it. Love it. So it's so subtle, and I think the film does a good job of. First, they're just shadows,
right?
And then
that's what I was expecting for the rest of the movie,
right?
Because that's usually what you get from a paranormal ghost, type movie. But that's just the start of it, and the creature design in this is excellent. I
agree. What shocked me, and we'll come back to the shadow people in a second. But what shocked me about the movie too was how quickly it progressed from just shadows to like, oh. Here's the full
physical
creatures.
Manifestations. Yeah.
So first of all, the reason I love the shadow people is that I don't know, it's just so creepy how it's done, and you can almost miss it, and I like that. And
I mean, like I said, that is something that I like, but it's also something that even though it's supposed to be subtle, it would have been nice if it was a little less subtle.
Well, and then there is a scene when the repairman gets there, and I love this scene because you see he's working on the lights, they go out. And this shot is really cool because he's facing the wall, and we see his face, and we see the whole basement behind him. And as soon as the lights go out, the shadow is there, in the background, and it's so sudden, and you're gonna see that one, I think. And then lights come back on, it's gone, and then of course the lights are gonna go off again, and he's gonna see it standing there again, and be like, well, you know what? And he'll try to shine his flashlight on it, and it runs. There's nothing really shocking or intuitive about this scene, but it's just so creepy. Right.
Well, because I mean, it kind of plays with your expectations of what these shadow creatures are. They're not, because they're running now. Right. They're not shadows.
Yeah.
They're physical.
So at this point, you're thinking, well, that's a neat trick, but if that's all this movie's gonna be, I already know where it's going.
Right.
And literally seconds later, it escalates.
Right. So once again, it blows away your expectations.
We see the creature, who is, and this scene is kind of startling. It's the girl bent over something, and she rushes him. You know what I'm talking about? So the repairman is in there with the flashlight. He goes in the back room where it's the bad stuff behind the hole in the wall, and he sees this weird thing bent over, and then this girl puts her head up, and let's talk about the design of these creatures.
Yeah, so they're basically they're people, but they're burnt.
Right.
They're burnt like bad, like not even like to the point, that a person would be badly burned. They're beyond that, and like it is a supernatural.
Husks. Yeah,
it's a supernatural burning.
Their eyes are completely.
Their
white.
Eyes are white. They're still on fire.
Yeah,
a little bit like
molten. They're like smoldering,
and you can see like flakes of their burnt ashes. Body, their ashes. Yeah,
it's just really.
Which is, again, going back to the trailer shows the creatures.
See, that's disappointing. That's why sometimes trailers just ruin the entire experience. So I love that. And after that, honestly, the shadow people are pretty much gone. And there's some dream sequences where the creatures are invading the dreams of Anne and Paul. And not Paul yet, because one thing I didn't like about Paul is that I didn't like it at first, then I realized it's fine, as he starts out as the very typical skeptic.
Right.
But, however, quickly he's experiencing these dreams, and he's like, all right, I'm on board. Yeah, that image Neil just pulled up an image here. That's a scary image. The eyes are all white, and it's a good creature.
Right. Yeah, it's different. It's unique for sure.
The other thing about this film is that by the time we have a full picture of what these creatures look like, the film really isn't about the creatures anymore.
No, yeah, but before we get to that, because I think we're getting a little too far ahead, let's talk about where these creatures come from, because there is an explanation. So
yeah, and you actually have to when the neighbors show up.
The neighbor shows up, yeah. And this might even be... Is it after or before the repairman? It could be before the repairman. We might have skipped it.
I believe this is before the repairman.
So we skipped this little detail, but I'm
going to check. Let's start talking about the neighbors.
So they get a knock on their door, which again is kind of like a horror trope. Like, oh, we're not expecting any company yet. There's a knock on the door, and they go and answer it, and it's their neighbors. It's an older man and an older woman. What are their names? Dave.
It's Dave, and I don't know his wife's name.
It's Kat. Dave and
Interesting. Kat. And Dave is, of course, this old actor that we were talking about. What's it, Larry Fresden?
No.
Fresenden?
That's Jacob.
Oh, I'm sorry. Monty Markham.
Yeah.
Monty Markham. Anyway, neighbors show up.
And he's just kind of introducing himself.
Surprised to find that there's a family in the house. We're going to see why he's so surprised.
And then he starts, or I guess Paul and Ann start talking about how cheap they got the house, and it was such a good deal they had to take it, and he starts to reveal why it was so cheap.
Which initially the reason is that the house was a mortuary, and the family living there,
the Dagmars,
3 people. The father was a mortician during 1859 is when he moved in. You don't some of these details you don't get actually till the end of the movie, but and what Dave says here is that Dagmar was selling bodies. Started selling bodies
and burying empty coffins
and burying them. And the town, wasn't he selling the?
He was selling the bodies to a university.
Well, and to a restaurant. Chop Suey is what was the story. Yeah.
Oh.
So, and Paul's like, oh my god. And anyway, and they got ran out of town.
Well,
That's
They
the
were
story.
killed, weren't they?
No. Dave just says they were ran out of time.
Oh yeah, that's what
which
Dave
sets,
tells them.
of course, a false precedent. As later we're going to see that they indeed never left the house. They are, in fact, still there. Right. So that's the premise. And then, Anne, who thinks that Bobby is in the house, is all the more on edge now. And after the repairman comes, she decides and gets assailed. He doesn't die, but he gets real badly burned.
He's burned, yeah.
He's like,
because the creature, that's another cool thing, is it actually reaches out and it grabs you
and burns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she calls her friend. Well, actually, it's Bobby's roommate's parents.
Right. So Bobby had a roommate named Harry, and Harry's parents are mediums. Well, the
mom,
the mother, May, her name.
They're kind of hippie-ish.
May and Jacob, yeah, and Paul said. Anne says, I want to call them up, and Paul's like, they're just stoners,
Right.
He's like, are you kidding me?
He's a very, buttoned up, Paul is.
He just wants his whiskey. I love how much whiskey is in this movie. It's all whiskey. Everybody's just drinking whiskey. So they come up. Anne had already called them, so Paul really never had a choice. But I kind of like how Paul, Paul's not an asshole, Despite being, a skeptic,
he's just an older... like I said, he's kind of buttoned up, by the books, straight and narrow.
But he's likable because he just loves his wife, and he's like, you know what, we're gonna do it. And he has this weird sense of humor about it, and he's so they end up coming up, and then we get introduced before, and Harry, their son, is actually gonna come up too with
his girlfriend. Yeah.
Before that though, so Jacob and May, the hippie parents, the mediums, make their way into town, and then they go with Jacob, with what's his name, with Anne and Paul. They go into town, and this is where the movie gets really weird and even more kind of graphic novel-y, kind of surreal, is when we meet the town.
Yeah, because they walk into what's there in the town, and they say all there is like an old burger restaurant, bar,
some kind of bar,
deal. So they go there to eat, and when they walk in, everyone in the bar turns and just stares at them.
Like white blood cells immediately lock onto them.
I like that simile there.
Just they all immediately aware. And it's weird because it wouldn't really happen to the extent that it's very antagonistic. The bartender is super pissed off, and everybody's pissed off, and you're like, it's weird. And it's another instance where the movie's kind of harboring that really unnerving.
Yeah. And because it doesn't really explain why. No one says anything to him.
Right.
Well, I mean, obviously the bartender is like, "Oh, are you here to eat?" But she's kind of mad about it.
Yeah.
So while that's going on, they're eating.
Yeah, they're eating, and they're not being embraced by the village here, by the town of Aylesbury. Harry and his girlfriend, who doesn't really matter that much.
No.
They show up at the house. And they find the note that said that everybody had gone to town, make yourself at home. And they're like, we're just going to stay here and wait for him. So they do. They drink a lot of whiskey. They definitely help themselves.
They start to get a little frisky.
Yep.
Which is typical horror movie kind of thing, that it flips on its head.
Right, because there actually is no sex in the movie.
Right.
Another cool thing. It's so typical. You don't see it. There's a little bit of, it's almost humorous how... Harry's like, well, what do we do now? And then she's like, he, as if it's making fun of that concept itself. Right. Anyway, as soon as that happens, stuff starts going wrong real fast. They start hearing noises.
From the basement.
And it definitely, I want to talk more about this, but it feels like the basement just has this pulling presence, especially evident by the end. The first scene in this movie is the mother going down into the basement because of the noises. It's almost like they don't even have a choice. It's this I don't know the word, it's like sorcery, but you know what I mean?
Like enticing almost.
Yeah, it's supernatural. They can't resist it. So, which makes sense. So anyway, quickly, these characters are desecrated. Harry,
but it's in a cool and once again surprising manner.
Yeah, okay.
Because he goes down into the basement and the door slams, right?
Yeah. The door slams in his face before he goes down, and he's like, and then he goes down.
Oh, okay.
And then he's like, "Baby, I'm in the basement," and she's like, "Tee hee hee."
Yeah, and she goes to look,
and
Oh yeah, and he's standing there, and she's looking down at him.
Yep, and then you actually start to see smoke around him.
Right.
And he's very quickly seized around. He's seized by one of the creatures, and in probably the first brutal scene of the movie, he's like pushed back against the stairs, and this creature punctures his eyes with his fingers, and it's brutal. It's great. And
so she rushes out of the house.
Yeah, the one weird thing about this scene is she wasn't freaking out enough yet at this point. I feel
that there
like
was something behind him.
In the car, she's freaking out. Yeah, but here her boyfriend just died, and she's like,
well, maybe she was in shock. But.
Yeah. So, but it's fine because she gets in the car. She's super freaked out.
And she's speeding away.
Love this scene.
And because this is another one of those things, like I was expecting her to go to the town and find them.
Yep.
And, they're not going to believe him or believe her.
Yep.
And as she's driving...
She coughs.
Right.
And then we see a little smoke, and then...
from the back seat.
She looks in the mirror.
And one of the creatures.
Very good. Pretty startling.
And it pierces her with its hand through the seat, through her chest.
Yeah.
And she just slowly, peels off the road.
Yeah. Great scene. I want to bring this scene back because one question I was asking is, well, if there's a corpse and a car on the road, somebody's going to see that.
Right.
And I think there's actually an explanation for why nobody ever saw that.
Yeah, we'll have to keep that in mind because I don't want to get out of sequence too much.
So anyway, long story short, Paul, Anne, May, and Jacob are never going to find out about this.
And while this is happening, because May is the character's name. Right. May and Jacob are their friends that are the mediums. And while they're eating, she starts to choke, right?
Oh, yeah. She experiences an episode where she senses their death, but she doesn't really know it's their death.
And this is kind of where it gives a little bit of credibility to the fact that they are mediums and that this is real. Because Paul kind of dismisses them as being a little, like he said, they just smoke weed and they're hippies. And and so they're going to get back to the house, and I want to note that there were, Harry and his girlfriend had clothes everywhere. The whiskey glasses were out, and everything is now back to normal. It's cleaned up, yeah.
I want to bring that back because it's going to matter. And anyway, after they're chilling,
and the parents assumed that the kids just hadn't made it there yet.
Right. So everything's cool. They're going to settle in for the night. Now, let's go back to the bar for kind of a little, maybe the most ridiculous scene in the movie.
Yeah, this is,
But again, it still reminds me of a comic book, which is why I don't mind how nefarious this scene is. So we got the bar. The bartender's talking to some
waitress,
new green waitress. She has bad lines. Maybe the only person that has bad lines written. Doesn't matter. She knock at the door. Bartender's like, "Go away. Tell that person to go away." So this newbie goes to the door, and we hear a gunshot. And the neighbor, who other than Dave, the friendly neighbor, steps in with, I don't know if his shotgun is out, but he had killed.
One thing that we missed, and it's not a huge deal.
Okay.
But before Dave and Kat left, the first time they met Paul and Ann, Kat had slipped Paul a note that said, "Get out." Right,
which I kind of almost didn't appreciate this, but yeah, so when the first time the neighbors Dave and Kat were in the house, Dave is like, "The house needs a family." And
yeah,
like,
he
that's
keeps
not
saying
ominous
that
or anything. And then Kat had secretly slipped Paul a note. Ann doesn't see it. It says, "The house needs a family. Get out."
Get out. Yeah.
Maybe one of the more heavy-handed things in the movie. Paul is kind of like, whatever.
Right.
So he doesn't care.
But anyways, so back to the bar.
Yeah, so Dave, he's like the town leader, older dude, he has just killed this waitress, and we're like, yo, what? Like, I don't know about that. And the bartender's like, I shouldn't have sent the new girl.
Yeah.
And he's just like, whatever. And it's like, it's really like brutal. And it
was a way to show you that Dave is evil.
Yeah, right.
In the most over the top way possible.
It reminds me of the Stephen King book, The Dead Zone. I've only read a little bit of it, but the very first scene, one of the first scenes, is the villain character delivering Bibles to a house, and he ends up killing their dog because it's annoying him.
Right. So it's just an over-the-top way to
but
show.
He's evil. Surprise, surprise. So him and Kat are there, and basically it's revealed that there's some kind of power in the house that, if left unquenched, every 30 years it wakes up and punishes the entire town.
And this is where it kind of alludes to the time period, because he says it happened in 1949. He said, you remember how bad it was in 49 when it didn't get a family.
79.
And it
didn't think about that.
It
spread to the whole town.
So that, I mean, by him saying 30 years, it leads you to assume this is either 79 or 2009. And it's at that point that you kind of feel, well, it's probably closer to 79.
Yeah, especially considering when May and Jacob show up, Paul says she's driving, as if he's surprised that a woman is driving. And later he'll say, don't let her drive my car. Yeah. So totally indicative of the time period. I think that gives it away right there. And so anyway, Dave, and you can tell Kat, who is Dave's wife, is not really on board because she's trying to speak up, and Dave's like, shut up.
She's very meek.
Shut up. Yeah, so
shut up.
Yeah, you know, so they're like, okay, we gotta make sure these people die.
Yeah, because they say it's unusual, because normally the house had killed whoever had moved in by now.
Yeah, it had been 2 weeks, right?
It's an extended period.
So Dave's
of time.
getting restless. He's like, all right, the house isn't doing its job.
Yeah, and that's where he reveals that it was the Dagmars were killed in the house.
Right. It was a fire, but it's actually not revealed here.
Oh, it's not? A fire. Okay. But he does say that it's the Dagmars.
Yep, it's the Dagmars. So he wasn't telling the truth. The Dagmars are still here, not to bring that back over and over again. But that's what's happening. So now we know the villain's revealed. And I said in the Green Inferno, you know, that I really don't appreciate villain characters in horror movies. But here's the thing, is this movie is already so surreal, and a movie like the Green Inferno, like, isn't. And
yeah, well, and then, like, I mean, kind of a problem with the Green Inferno was that, like, Alejandro, the villain character, was such a caricature of an evil character, whereas Dave, he's almost, I mean, like, the whole town is evil at this point, and he's just kind of the leader. So it's not so much he's a villain character, he's a leader of the villains.
So and that's what I mean when I say that at the point when the creatures are starting to reveal themselves a little bit more fully, the focus shifts to something else at the same time. And right after this, we get Paul's dream sequence where the creatures show up and they really terrorize him, and he's finally convinced.
Oh yeah, that's a good scene, because he's asleep and he sees the feet at the door. And he's calling out to, you know, May, Paul, or Jacob, excuse me, and you know, there's no answer. And then he looks over, and Anne's face is like
zombified.
She looks like a creature,
And then the creature, of course, grabs him. He wakes up and screams. And during this time, the medium, May, Jacob's wife, is like, no. In her sleep, She wakes up when Paul wakes up. Paul's screaming, and then May is like, there's death everywhere. And there's also a great scene that happens a little bit before this, where May's doing a little bit of a psychic interpretation. And Paul kind of jokes, like, what are we going to do, a seance? And Anne's like, yeah, are we going to try to speak to whatever is doing this? And May says, we don't need to try to find the darkness. It's everywhere. And that's a really good ominous line.
Yeah.
There's just good ominous parts like that. Paul is kind of a believer that something's happening right now.
After that scene, for sure.
Yeah. So next is kind of when this movie starts.
This is almost the climax.
Going to hell.
But the climax takes, like, it's like a 30-minute set piece where this all occurs.
Right. So May and Anne go into town. They're going to end up running into the Reverend Dave, who now knows there's a medium in the house, and he's not happy about that. So what he's going to do, because they run into May, and Dave is like, oh, you should have felt something in the house, did you? And
that's pretty good impersonation.
It's like, did, and he's like, oh, sounds like you have quite a talent, or something like that.
That was pretty good.
That's kind of what he sounds like. If you're not going to watch this movie, at least take that away from it. During this time, and so now Dave is going to rally the troops, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Talk about what
Dave is not screwing around anymore.
Let's talk about what Paul and Jacob are doing.
All right, let's talk about them.
So as a joke, before they leave, you know, the wife say, like, don't get into any trouble or whatever. And I was expecting them to kind of have, like, a weed smoking moment, but he's like, what are we going to do? Have a seance? And, you know, they all laugh. And then, you know, the wife's leaving. Paul says, so what are we going to do? And he goes, have a seance.
Yep. So,
that's what Jacob says.
and you know it's a bad idea because May already said we don't want to mess with
Right.
this. It's everywhere.
So they set it up for the seance, and he starts reading from a book. And while he's reading
Love
it,
this scene.
he starts saying some weird stuff about Bobby, particularly.
Yeah, and
that
it
he's gonna
slips
peel.
in.
Yeah, because it's
Peeled-
very, very normal. Like, you know, if anyone's
we invite the spirits to come, and then these really disturbing graphic lines will slip in about peeling the skin off of Bobby's bones, and then even after that, because Paul is like, "What did you say?" and he's like, "It's a welcoming. We're inviting him into our circle, and the circles of hell." You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, okay. I didn't catch that because
and
I thought it was just him slipping in and out because in a couple of seconds, minutes, you
he
find
does
out
slip out again.
he is possessed.
He becomes possessed.
So that's what I thought was him just slipping in and out of the
Yeah.
possession. But I like that it's, you know,
Yeah,
it's the demons or the, you know, ghost creatures speaking.
right. Well, at that part, I think it's almost the demon inside of him trying to not make
Like a
him sound
demon?
possessed. Like, oh, it's a greeting. It's
Yeah.
a welcoming. We welcome him into our
Right.
circle, but it still sounds demonic. And then he says some stuff about wasted meat, and then Paul's like,
Yeah.
okay, we're done here. And that's when the possession takes full force, and he's like, tie me down. You got to tie me down, Paul.
Because he's still a little bit aware
Yep.
of what's going on, and he knows that bad
Yep.
stuff's going to happen.
Yep. So he's tied down. When May and Anne finally get home, this is a little comedic. Jacob is tied to a chair with a sock in his mouth.
Yeah.
And now Paul is like, you guys got to help. I believe everything. One thing I want to say about this, I think maybe Paul's only character hole is he's so mistrusting of women. He doesn't want women to drive, yet he's so
Reliant.
yeah. And before they do the seance, Paul is like, are you sure that May would want this to happen? And that just weirded me out because I'm like, well, Paul, if he doesn't really want a woman driving, why would he fall back on the authority of a woman?
Right. Well, maybe it's just because the scene where, well, I don't know, because I was going to say maybe it's just he trusts her more in the supernatural.
Well, he doesn't trust her
realm.
to drive. So. But he is freaked out already by the dream. And that was just the one instance where I thought, I don't know. But it's okay. It's all right. But it's not all right because Jacob is possessed and this isn't going to end well. So May is, May's trying to exorcise the demon. And I really like, they kind of used a weird distortion, double voice.
Yeah.
It's a little expected of this situation.
Of a demonic possession. He does eat the sock, by the way.
Yeah, he eats and
which is
swallows
kind of
the
funny.
sock. He's going to break out of his restraints. And he just keeps saying, this is my house, this is my house.
Yeah, he does.
Obviously Dagmar. And I think he says, like, your boy is dead, he's rotting in the basement. I don't know if they're talking about Harry or Bobby. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, because it could go either way.
I think Jacob's character does a really good job of acting like insane here. There's some spit that flies out of his mouth.
Yeah, well, Larry Fessenden, the actor, he kind of I mentioned it a little bit before, but he's always kind of plays this weird, character actor kind of thing. But so the end of that scene comes when he picks up a fire poker and shoves it through his own eye.
So this movie is getting slowly more brutal,
right?
And he kills himself, brutally. I like it. He's basically like, you're all gonna die. We're gonna take all of you. Nobody's safe. This is my house. And right after that, we get another very staggering death.
Don't they? Because they try to run out of the house.
Well, they try to run at the house, and it's Dave at the door.
As soon as May opens it.
Well, May opens the door, and her head is immediately blown off by Dave's shotgun.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe like chunks and blood.
Oh, it's very gory.
End up on the camera.
Yeah,
which is cool because there was a scene earlier, like because this film does a lot of like not artsy, but just cinematic.
Talking about the snow.
Yeah, where it's. Like you said, it's shots of like the nature of the house and around the house, and there's one where it's looking up at a tree as snow falls on the camera. Which I mean I don't know if this was on purpose, but it's kind of in contrast between the snow, which is white pure, and the blood.
I like that. I like that interpretation. So now we're at the climax, and the town is here, and that's what I mean when I say that. Now we've known what the creatures kind of look like and are about for a while. Now it's not the creatures they really have to worry about. It's the town.
It's the town.
And you'll notice that the creatures are leaving them alone. They want the townspeople.
Right, and that's kind of something that I feel like we should talk about towards the end.
Yeah. So the town comes in.
Well, let's link back to what you said before. Now that we know that the town's in it, when the son's Harry's girlfriend died and her car crashed, who cleaned that up? The townspeople.
Oh,
So
I have another theory, but that's interesting. Oh, that's really interesting.
Because it does mention that the townspeople have a deal with the Dagmars, basically.
Yeah.
Where the Dagmars would kill the family, the townspeople would clean it up, and this cycle would happen every 30 years.
In turn, the darkness would not spread to the town.
Correct.
That is an interesting theory. I have an alternate one that I want to pose at the end.
Okay.
This is where there's basically a war happening in the house. I love how this is kind of stupid. None of the townspeople have guns except for Dave, who has a shotgun. You'd think more of them would have guns. I don't know. They all have axes.
It is kind of like a sleepy country town, though, and it is. I mean, I don't know about the national landscape and gun control in the late 70s, but I mean, maybe you assume that less people had guns. Period.
I don't know. In a town like this, though,
in a town like this,
so we'll see. The scene is great, and this is where it's like. It gets super gory. The creatures are coming out of the walls and the floor and dragging people down and
burning them and
just
choking them up in the ceiling.
And then, really cool, really stylistic. Someone will get killed and it'll shoot to the basement and blood will spurt out of this black hole.
Yeah,
and it's just like it's awesome. And then you hear them; they're trapped.
Because the deaths are very gory and bloody,
gory.
Which I was not expecting.
No.
And well, I mean, the movie kind of builds you up to that with the death of the son and the girlfriend, and all the other deaths prior have slowly gotten more and more graphic.
You're still not fully ready for how gory
for this. This is like
it's gonna get.
It's like you said, it's an all-out war. And back to the trailer. I don't want to keep talking about how bad the trailer is, but the trailer features several clips from this scene.
That's terrible.
And it features the guy that gets dragged through the stairs, the guy that the guy that's choked up in the ceiling.
Okay.
Which I was disappointed in.
Yeah, that sucks. Well, there's so I just like this scene because it's still it's graphic, but it also harkens back to this surreal graphic novel kind of feel where there's a war happening. It's a little bit ridiculous, but it feels right because the movie makes it feel right. Anyway, and what's going to happen is they're gonna
barricade themselves. Paul and Ann upstairs.
Yeah, everybody's dying. I keep thinking he's a reverend.
I don't
like
know
that
if
he's not.
It never explicitly says what he is, though. Oh, and also before this happens, or while this is happening, I believe it cuts to Kat, his wife,
yeah, Kat,
and she's dead.
Dave killed Kat. She was getting in the way.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for you meddling Kat. Anyway,
Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo.
Running theme with our show.
The Scooby-Doo tricks. The
Scooby-Doo plans. Whatever.
So this is a really cool scene because while Paul and Ann are barricaded upstairs and the bartender from town is trying to get at them, Dave confronts Dagmar, the father, the mortician.
Well, because like we said, the ghost family, creature family, are killing a lot of the townsfolk.
Yeah.
And Dave, he's like, Dagmar.
And it's a break. It's like a third wall break because he confront. Is it fourth wall? Oh yeah, fourth wall. What would the third wall be? Like, is that 3D glasses? Okay, well, whatever.
That's for you to decide.
And Dagmar confronts the other way around. Dave confronts Dagmar, and he's like, "What the hell are you doing? You're supposed to be killing these people. That's our deal. We bring you people." And this is cool because you wouldn't expect it. It's another thing that you don't expect in this universe, and it happens because it doesn't usually happen.
And this happens as Paul and Ann. They've killed someone. They killed the bartender.
Yeah, the bartender is about to murk Ann.
Yeah,
and Ann,
from behind.
This is one of the more unbelievable things too. Ann's ready. She's got not one but three knives.
A handful of knives, like kitchen knives.
Suddenly,
butcher knives, but steak knives.
And suddenly she's a trained assassin. And when she's about to get murked from the back, she swings around and neck jabs this bartender. Game over.
Which again goes back to Paul being reliant on women because Paul doesn't notice her walk in.
That's a really good point. Paul doesn't do anything in this movie. The men really don't do anything in this movie. Yeah. That's a good point. A lot of blood spurting out of her neck. Really gory. Oh, really good.
That part was a little. I don't know if comical is the right word, but
it's cheesy.
Cheesy because it goes on for an extended period of time,
the top.
And it's literally like a fountain.
Yeah,
it's not just like a couple spurts. It's a continuous flow.
Yeah, I liked it for some reason, but it's not.
I did like it.
It's not even like the bartender was that major of a character, and I'm not really sure
like where you'd be happy to see her get offed, you know?
And
it's not.
Yeah, I do want to say that during this, the voice of who Anne and Paul think is Bobby is whispering, get out. He's shouting, get out, very distantly. And I missed this the first time I watched the film. I wasn't watching with subtitles.
Because she says, this was a part that kind of made me laugh. And she's like, I hear Bobby or something. And Paul's like, he's telling us to get the F out.
Yeah.
It was humorous.
Yeah, and then there was a scene before the climax where you can hear quote unquote Bobby's voice, and I thought that was cool. And even the way that Anne becomes a killer in that instance, I think maybe the house is affecting her and them in ways.
I could see that.
Maybe that's an argument. I think that's an interpretation. If it is, it's subtle. Okay. Anyway, so
Dagmar and Dave.
Yep, they're Paul and
Anne are watching.
They escape after killing this bartender in the attic.
Right. Then they go downstairs.
They go downstairs, and Dave is like, all right, hold up. And they're like, what up? And he's like, come in, get it. You guys got to get in here. He's got the gun.
Which I thought was kind of, like, why wouldn't he have just killed him right then?
Yeah.
But anyways.
Yeah, there's a very, this is the one part where he does this monologue, and it's kind of cornball. Yeah. But it's okay. So what happens is he's going to give a kind of typical supervillain monologue, which, if you're thinking about it like a graphic novel, is fine. If you're turned off by that, that's fine too. I can see both ways. And he's facing the Dagmar family. There's a girl, the Dagmar father, and the wife are standing behind Dave. You can see him in the background. And Dave's very unintelligently facing away from them, talking to Paul and Anne. And he's like, you guys don't know what you've done. That kind of stuff. Blah, 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 blah. He's like, you're going to die. And then, of course, we see Dagmar sneaking up very slowly behind Dave, and he will murk Dave very, very brutally.
Grabs his head in his hands and crushes it like a melon.
Yeah, this is a very brutal.
It was awesome.
It was really cool. Yep, so you really do get to see him get his. He's done for. And I love the rest of this movie after that. It's very brief. Love it.
Okay, so let's talk about that then.
Right. So after that, Paul and Anne are like, whoa. And then the Dagmar family slowly retreats to the back of the room. They kind of are staring at each other from across the room,
Mm-hmm.
And then they link hands.
Mm-hmm.
The family links hands, and it's almost this sweet moment where they're they're still together.
It's almost like a truce between the families.
So then you see this shot of, it's the Dagmars in the shot, all burnt and zombified. The basement door opens, and then the lights flicker, and Paul and Anne kind of look around, and then they're gone.
Right.
That's cool. And then it's over, right? No, it's not over. And the movie could have left it here, and it could have been this really nice, it's a truce. They killed the town, they're happy. I love what this movie does next.
So this is where Anne
just starts walking.
Goes into the basement.
Toward the basement. You don't even see her go down in the basement.
Yeah, she just goes
starts
towards
walking,
it.
and you see the basement door, and she turns her head toward it. And then Paul kind of starts walking toward the basement. And then
the camera is looking at Paul from the basement.
And
go ahead.
Yeah, you'll see the door's open, and Paul is approaching the door. He looks down, and he just slowly starts to smile really subtly, and he just says, oh, hey, Bobby.
And then did you hear in the background? It says, there's a little whisper, like a windy whisper that says, hi, Dad.
Is there? I got to go back and watch that. No, I think I did hear it. Maybe. I
definitely, I thought I heard it, and I replayed it, and I'm 100% sure that it happens.
I don't think I heard that, actually. That's sweet. And that's it. And then We Are Still Here rolls again, the same font. The same.
Right.
And then, I'll talk about that in a minute, but then we learn what really happened, which is that
it plays out through a series of newspaper headlines.
And I didn't watch this the first time I watched the movie. I thought, movie over, done.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I missed the most important part, which is that it's a bunch of newspaper clippings that reveals that in 1859, when the house was built and the Dagmars moved in, they unearthed something bad.
It's either like an ancient Indian burial ground or like
they don't explain it.
I feel like there was a line that referred to almost like an elder god.
Yeah.
Like some kind of cult thing.
That's cool. And there's an earthquake when they break ground. Yep. And all these little details that you would never really get watching the movie. And
it said that like the crops started to die off.
Right.
So the river runs black.
There's a plague, a curse on the land after this mortuary is built. Eventually the mortuary starts to burn. The Dagmars are, of course, killed. We can assume that they were doing evil things because of the house, I think.
Almost like an Amityville.
But the town might have also sacrificed them to appease these forces.
Or it could be that the Dagmar, the father, through nature of his occupation, a mortician, there's a lot of blood within the house.
Yeah.
And that the god or the ancient Indian god or whatever it is, almost like it took in the Dagmars as like a
host family.
Yeah.
Like they're going to be, and they were the first family, and now they're the family that kills following families.
Exactly. This is what I was mentioning earlier. It's very open to discussion.
Right.
But it's closed up enough that, you're satisfied.
Yeah.
But it's open enough that you want to, what do you think it was kind of deal.
And so in short, this curse that the power that flows forth from the ground beneath the house, not even the house, and that's what I mean when I say it's not really a haunted house story at all.
Right.
It pollutes the land. The cattle die, the crops die, people start turning up missing, dying. This is a plague, and the only way they can stop it is by sacrificing a family every 30 years. Now, here's my theory about the car that disappears, so-called. It could just be a plot hole, but what I'd like to think it is that how when Harry and his girlfriend die, all the stuff was thrown around the house and it gets cleaned up.
Yeah,
we learn that the evil is not contained to the house. Really, it can go anywhere.
Right. Well, because that's one thing that was surprising is once the girlfriend leaves the house, you think she's made it away.
Yeah, and nope, it follows her, and it can follow her, and that's why I think the evil could, just like it made the whiskey and the glasses go back to normal, it made the clothes disappear.
Yeah.
It could have made the car just disappear. Also would explain why all through this movie, and this is what I mean about codes, this movie gives us the code to interpret it. There's so many still shots of the landscape, the trees. They look so weird and spooky and deformed.
No,
it's
like
not
that.
about the house. It's about the land, and the land is cursed. And if we're paying attention, we can interpret from all the shots of the land and how weird it is and how desolate and dead it is, that it's really the whole land and maybe even the town, the way that they mob justice people.
Maybe
the town could be possessed. Who knows?
No, I really like that.
And the influence of the darkness has taken everything, not just the house, the whole town. Maybe.
No, yeah, it's definitely, it's one of those things that it could be that, or it could just be
something else.
Right.
It could be what you said. The townspeople could have cleaned it up. Maybe there isn't an influence over them and it's really just a writing thing, or maybe it's something else.
Right. Another thing that I think we should discuss is, so given that Paul thinks that he sees Bobby.
Yeah.
And you didn't hear it, but I mean, I'm pretty sure Bobby responds.
That's great. Or what?
Do we think this is actually Bobby, or do we think it's the Dagmars trying to keep the family there? Because the reason I think that this is open for debate is, why did the Dagmars not kill the family before? Right. This could be something, maybe Bobby's presence or his ghostly presence followed them and communicated with the Dagmars in some way, and discussed that they weren't bad people. Or maybe it's just the Dagmars playing a trick. Do you want mine? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Here's my interpretation, and I'd be interested to see what you guys think. Obviously, there are a lot of different interpretations. Well, there's a couple. There's not a ton.
Yeah.
Here's what I think. Not for a second do I believe that Bobby was ever in this house.
Okay.
You got to remember a couple things. One, the fact that Bobby's talking to them at all, this could all just be, I think it's all a manipulation.
Right.
And maybe it's not even the Dagmars manipulating. It could be the force behind the Dagmars. Yeah. The point is, the force, the darkness, whatever it is, it wants everything it can eat. And it's going to do everything it can to get as many bodies as it can the other thing is that when Bobby, I mean, we hear his voice, but at the end, where does Bobby bring them? To the basement, which is where
all the bad stuff happens.
The darkness is. And that's why I think that Bobby was never there. But we do get the doubt because, May says, this is what also kind of leads me to believe Bobby was never there, is because May says, your son it's not Bobby.
Right.
It's not your son.
She says it's not Bobby.
But I do think that, Bobby's distant spiritual voice does talk to them at least 3 or 4 times throughout the movie. Who knows?
Go ahead.
I don't know. I would like to believe that this movie leaves you without hope.
I'm on the other side.
Okay,
I think that it definitely is Bobby.
Oh, okay.
Because it makes a point that obviously it's not Bobby doing the killings and stuff. I just think I said, it's Bobby's spirit has communicated with the Dagmars and kind of won the Dagmars over because they're a similar family. Mom, dad, child. Mm-hmm. That tragedy had kind of struck the family. And I guess I just don't see why the Dagmars would have not killed Paul and Anne beforehand if there wasn't some other motivation. Maybe that's just they were tired of being stuck in this, routine, and they wanted to kill the townspeople. Or maybe it's because, Bobby convinced them. And this could even connect to the ancient spirit, and because there's a lot of beforehand we talked about the picture slamming and the baseball, and it's subtle stuff. Maybe they were trying to scare the family out of the house because they didn't want to have to kill them.
I'm open to that too.
Right? No, I love I'm not saying that you're wrong.
No, that's great. I would really be interested to hear if anybody wants to leave a comment. What if you've seen the movie, or even if you haven't, maybe what your interpretation of that
just
would
from
be,
our discussion,
what you would rather see, because it's almost about what you would rather believe in this movie.
Because that's it's definitely like I don't think either one is wrong. I think it could go easily both ways, and that's what I think is so cool about it.
And just the end in general, how so many movies are just gonna drop it. It's all about the build-up, and the end is going to drop it. But this movie, it's one of the better endings to a horror film that I've ever seen, I think. It's very satisfying in its ability to leave us dissatisfied. You know what I mean?
Like I said, it's satisfying, but it's open.
Yeah.
Which it's not wrapped up in a nice little bow, but maybe it's put in a nice little box.
Right.
For you.
Right.
And then one other thing, kind of, unless you had anything else you wanted to say about the movie, because I'm going to kind of get off the movie a little bit.
I think we can wrap up in a minute. But
the reviews for this film, and this isn't something that I generally pay a whole lot of attention to.
Okay.
But one thing that I think is of note is that this movie has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, but on IMDb, which I know again these aren't perfect,
right?
Grades for these films.
Yeah.
It has a 5.7.
Interesting.
And so IMDb is generally just people that have watched the movie, whereas Rotten Tomatoes is
an aggregate score of critics.
So do you feel where do you feel that and even if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, because Rotten Tomatoes does have an audience score. And the audience score is 53%. With an average rating of a 3, the average rating for critics is a 7.2.
Yeah.
That's a 3 out of 5, by the way, for the audience score. So how do you feel, or why do you feel that this movie is so, what's the right word, splitting, or, you get what I'm saying? Like, why?
Oh, the split reviews? Why the split?
I mean, maybe you don't have an answer to that.
No, that's a hard question to answer, because when I'm going to be honest, when I watched the film, it was one of these things where me and my buddy were looking at movies on Rotten Tomato, and this one just so happened to have a good score, and we were like, that looks cool, let's watch it. And after I watched it, I'd like to think I wasn't influenced by seeing the 94 before, but I was like, my God, like compared to most horror movies I watch, that was a stellar movie.
Yeah. But is it maybe that the general public doesn't get that it's a paying respect or homage to old school horror, or is it that it doesn't get that it's like some of the scenes are meant to be cheesy?
It's hard to say. What do you think? Because it's hard to say.
It's definitely something that I wish I could wrap my head around. But there's not a whole lot of movies where I've seen you know, a discrepancy like this. Like it might be like an 80-60 or, you know, 70-50 split.
Yeah.
This is a 90-50 split. Like that's huge. I feel like
it's really interesting. If anybody, you know, if anybody else has any theories about that, I'd love to hear them, because it could be a thing where maybe it's the kind of movie that you either like or you just kind of feel meh about.
Right.
Maybe you really like it. I don't think.
And both of us just happen to really like it.
Yeah, it's tough to say. You have to remember that most of the people that write reviews either really like it, so they're writing a review, or they really hate it.
True.
What is the 53 even? But it's weird that it's so neutral.
Right.
It's just a really interesting question that I don't know if I could answer. If you want my take on the movie, the reason I think it's so good and worth watching is because it does so few things wrong.
I'd agree.
While just kind of really crafting a love letter to what's so good about the haunted house story, and just ghost stories and paranormal stories in general, while also touching on a little bit of a gorier theme.
Yeah, no,
but tastefully.
I'd agree with all of your points. I guess it's modern, but it's classic.
There's nuances, which are so hard to pick up on the first time you watch it. You really have to watch it twice, I think, to realize why there's so many shots of the landscape.
Yeah, I didn't catch that.
It just doesn't even make sense.
For sure, I didn't catch that on my first time, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and, you know, if this movie does something not as good, maybe it's that sometimes the characters don't completely make sense. Sometimes, you know, maybe it does fall into a little bit too much of the common tropes of these films, but I think it always has a little bit of a twist that keeps you on board.
Yeah.
And while not completely reinventing the genre, it really just is a very concentrated statement of why this genre can still be good.
Yeah, when people say stuff like, oh, there's no good horror movies anymore. No, it's just you're looking in the wrong places.
Yeah.
You got to kind of dig a little deeper, because the horror movies like this aren't the ones that are going to go make $1 million whatever dollars, right, because they're paranormal activity jump scares. And this does have jump scares.
There are quite a few jump scares.
They're tasteful, I guess. So it's definitely a movie that I think if people have lost faith in the horror genre is one to check out, because it hits on all the points. If you're a fan of atmospheric horror,
it's there.
It hits it. If you're a fan of gory horror,
it's there.
It's there. If you're a fan of paranormal, if you're a fan of person on person, you know what I mean?
And you know, at the same time, it doesn't try to do too much, and that astounds me. I don't know if I can articulate exactly why touching on all those things isn't disgenuine.
Yeah.
And I think it's because the characters are, for the most part, believable. They're fun to watch. They're fun to spend an hour and a half with, and it's just a really rewarding film, I think.
Yeah, I know for sure I'll be checking out whatever Ted Geohagen does next.
Absolutely.
I thought this was great.
Speaking of next, what are we doing next?
I'm pretty excited about this one, too.
Me too.
Crimson Peak comes out this weekend, the 16th. So we're going to be checking that out. Guillermo del Toro is one of my favorite directors, personal favorite.
I'm not too familiar. I watched that movie, The Orphanage, that he did from 2007.
Well, see, he was just a producer.
Oh, shoot. That was a Spanish film.
But, I mean, it's a very del Toro film. Yeah. But we can talk about that next week, because we're already kind of running a little over on this. But so, yeah, if you're planning on seeing Crimson Peak this weekend, or if you want to keep up with us, go check out Crimson Peak, and we'll let you know what we think next week. If you've enjoyed this podcast, and especially if you have any thoughts to contribute on We Are Still Here, we would love to hear them. We want everybody to understand that our discussion cannot cover everything. This is really just a springboard to engage people in more discussion, and we hope that we can continue to do that. Right, so make sure, I mean, I don't want to be one of those people. Like us on Facebook at Blood Feud Podcast. Yep, we'll be on YouTube for the time being from now on. Our SoundCloud subscription is non-existent, and so we have run out of space. And then Twitter, we're at Blood Feud Pod. You know, just to keep up to date if you want, so that I'm not constantly spamming my Facebook, annoying everybody. Yep, absolutely. So without further ado, we thank you all for listening. We are Blood Feud Podcast. This has been We Are Still Here. Next week, Crimson Peak. We'll see you next time, guys. Thanks so much.